Good afternoon, everybody. Let's reaffirm our intention before we begin. So, by our explication and hearing of the Lankavatara Sutra,
Recording in progress.
may all beings throughout space and time find the causes and conditions of their suffering to be alleviated and removed. May our own understanding and practice of the Dharma ripen, and may the Sangha flourish. May it be so. Okay. So a few more preliminaries are necessary. One is to say that in the Tibetan tradition, as well as in the Pali tradition, to my understanding, the suttas and sutras themselves are objects of veneration. If you cast yourself some 1,000 years ago plus, 1,500 years ago, 2,000, having access to the technology of writing was a big deal in a world where civility and the rule of law were by no means a given, knowledge difficult to come by, difficult to pass on. Even the materials required to be able to document words were rare and precious. And so there's a culture in most of the Buddhist tradition that is somewhat alien to the Zen tradition, which is to really understand that a copy of a sutra, of a teaching, is itself an embodiment of the Buddha Dharma and of the practice. And so I would encourage each of you, if you have a copy of the Lankavatara Sutra, while you're engaging with it, treat it as though it's Vaitara, or it's Kuan Yin, or it's Manjushri, it's Vajrasattva, right? It's the Buddha. Treat it as though it's one of the companion pieces on the altar. The sutra itself is worthy of veneration and of having respect for, right? And if you treat the sutra itself with respect, that changes the way that you engage with it, you know. I don't need to belabor the point too much, but Zen tends to put much more emphasis on direct experience. You can't substitute the words and the ideas for the experience, which is what the sutra says. But it's also true that, having access to the sutra itself is not to be taken for granted, especially today when you have every sutra ever written on your phone. You have access to the retchings of every wisdom tradition that humanity has produced thus far. If you know how to search well, it's there, right? And so it's easy for us to a book amongst books, especially for those of us that like books. But I'd really encourage you, I've taken up the personal practice. This copy of the Lankavatara Sutra that was given to me by my teacher in this cloth thing here, it sits on my personal altar permanently. I mean, it's there as part of my altar. And I have a raksu there that stays with this in case I need one when I'm at home at the Abbacy and I need to Zoom or something and have a raksu. So I'd invite you to consider, if you, at least for the duration of time where you're trying to engage with the sutra, treat the sutra well. Give the sutra sacred space that it deserves, and it will prove itself to be more accessible to you, I think, if you respect it that way. The other thing that from my dreams and my nap, I hope you all got to nap. I did, and I'm happy for it. It occurs to me that it would be nice before we start reading the text, and I do intend to just read the text and just present the text to you and maybe, dialogue with it a bit here and there. I would like to read for you some examples of this mind only, this yogacara, this one dharma that we practice. And just perhaps now that we've had a chance to ponder it from a more schematic angle, see how or if these teachings, how they land. From the Pali tradition, the Dhammapada, choices. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you, as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. We are what we think. We are, all that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts we make the world. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as your shadow, unshakable. Is this mere positive thinking? What is a pure mind? From the Lankavatara Sutra, luminous monks, luminous is mind, and it is defiled by incoming defilements. The uninstructed worldling doesn't discern that it actually doesn't discern that as it actually is present, which is why I tell you that for the uninstructed run-of-the-mill person, there is no development of mind. Luminous, monks, is mind, and it is freed from incoming defilements. The well-instructed disciple of the noble ones discerns, that is, it actually is present. Discerns that as it actually is present, which is why I tell you, for the well-instructed disciple, there is development and realization of mind. Nibbana Sutta. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, there would not be the case that emancipation from the born, the became, the made, and the fabricated could be discerned. But precisely because there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, emancipation from the born, the become, the made, and the fabricated is discerned. From the Prajnaparamita Sutra, Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 Lines, Chapter 12. The mind of the Buddha is never stopped. It was never produced. It has no duration in between production and stopping, and it gives no support. It is infinite, since it cannot be measured, and it is inexhaustible, like the realm of Dharma, Dharmadhatu itself. The Tathagata knows the polluted minds of beings for what they are, for he knows that the minds of ordinary people are not actually polluted by the polluting forces of perverted views, which are nothing but wrong ideas and do not really find a permanent place in them. The Tathagata knows unpolluted thoughts for what they are, for he knows that those minds are transparently luminous in their essential original nature. Mind you now, these are all different sources. Samadhi Mochana Sutta, Unlocking the Deep Mysteries Sutra. Bhagwan are the appearances of the forms of sentient beings and so forth, which abide in the nature of images of the mind, not different from the mind. The Bhagavan, the Buddha replied, Maitreya, they are not different from mind. Mahaparinirvana Sutta, great complete unbiting sutra. No self is birth and death. Self is the Tathagata. What is impermanent are voice hearers and the individually awakened. What is permanent is the Tathagata's Dharma body. Can you hear it a little differently? Perhaps? From the Sri Maladevi Sutra, the lion's roar of the queen. The Tathagata Garbha is eternal and unchanging. Therefore, the Tathagata Garbha is the basis, the support, and the foundation. O Buddha, the Tathagata is not separate, not severed, not liberated from, and not different from the inconceivable Buddha Dharmas. O Buddha, the basis, support, and foundation of conditioned phenomena, which are severed from, separate from, and different from the Buddha Dharmas, are also the Tathagata Garbha. The Tathagata Garbha is without any prior limit, is non-arising, and is indestructible, accepting suffering, having revulsion toward suffering, and aspiring to nirvana. The Tathagata Sutra. The Buddha can really see sentient beings' Tathagata Garbha, and because he wants to disclose the Tathagata Garbha to them, he expounds the sutras and the Dharma in order to destroy the kleshas, the obscurations that reveal the Buddha Dhatu, the Buddha element, Buddha nature. Such is the Dharma of all Buddhas. Whether or not Buddhas appear in the world, the Tathagata Garbha of all beings is eternal and unchanging. It is just that it is covered by obscurations in sentient beings. Tathagata Garbha means the womb of suchness. When the Tathagata appears, when a Buddha appears in the world, they expound the Dharma far and wide to remove the ignorance and tribulation and to purify their universal wisdom. If there's a bodhisattva who has faith in the teaching and practices it with single-pointed mind, they will attain liberation and correct universal enlightenment. And for the sake of the world, they will perform Buddha deeds far and wide. All that's before the Lankavatara Sutta, chronologically. That's selections from the Pali Canon, that's selections from other suttas and Tathagata Sutras. Now a little chunk from our main case here, the Lankavatara Sutra. Mahamati, the Tathagata Garbha of which I speak, is not the same as the self mentioned by the followers of other paths. Mahamati, when I speak about the Tathagata Garbha, sometimes I call it emptiness, shunyata, formlessness, animata, or intentionlessness, or the realm of reality, or dharma nature, or dharma body, the dharmakaya, or nirvana. What is devoid of self-existence, or what neither rises nor ceases, or original quiescence, or intrinsic nirvana, or similar expressions. It is to put an end to the fear foolish beings have about the expression, no self, that the Tathagatas, the Arhats, the fully enlightened ones proclaim the teaching of the Tathagata Garbha as a projectionless realm devoid of fabrications. Mahamati, bodhisattvas of the present and the future should not become attached to any view of self. Now, what about Bodhidharma? The one who tradition holds brought this sutra up from India into China. What did he ever have to say? Did he play in the same key? Bodhidharma's breakthrough sermon. If someone is determined to reach enlightenment, said Bodhidharma, what is the most essential method they can practice? The most essential method, which includes all the other methods, is beholding mind. But how can one method include all the others? The mind is the root from which all things grow. If you can understand the mind, everything else is included. It's like the root of a tree. All the tree's fruit and flowers, branches and leaves depend on its root. If you nourish its root, the tree multiplies. If you cut its root, it dies. The third ancestor, from Song of Trusting Mind. The way is perfect, like vast space. Now we have Chinese teachers speaking the Dharma. Bodhidharma, remember, was Indian. He moved up into China. Now we have a few generations of indigenous Chinese teachers speaking the same heart of wisdom in a language that made sense to them and to their students. The way is perfect, like vast space, where nothing is lacking and nothing is extra. Indeed, it is due to our choosing to reject that we do not see thus. To return to the root is to find the meaning, but to pursue appearances is to miss the source. At the moment of turning the light of awareness around, there is going beyond appearance and emptiness. Hongren's treatise on the Supreme Vehicle, the Chinese fifth ancestor. Now we're veering towards the 7th century. The basic essence of cultivating enlightenment should be discerned. It is the inherently complete and pure mind in which there is no false discrimination, and body and mind are fundamentally pure, unborn, and undying. This is the basic teacher. Platform Sutra, 8th century, 6th ancestor. This material body is an inn. It is not a fit refuge. But the 3 bodies of Buddha are your ever-present Dharma nature. Everyone has them, but because people are deluded, they don't see them. Everyone's nature is fundamentally pure, and the 10,000 dharmas are present in this nature. Song of Realizing the Way, 8th century. Yong Jias. The real nature of ignorance is Buddha nature itself. The empty, illusory body is the very body of the Dharma. When the Dharma body is realized, there's nothing at all. The original nature of all things is innately Buddha. Mind. Clear light mind. Emptiness bliss. You see? Mu. Shitao's record, 8th century. You must realize that the substance of your own mind is beyond annihilation and eternity, and its nature is beyond purity or impurity. Deep and complete, it is the same in sages and in ordinary people. It responds freely, differs from ordinary dualistic mind in its various functions. The triple world and the 6 realms appear spontaneously as nothing but mind. Shitao's grass roof hermitage. I built a grass hut where there's nothing of value. After eating, I relax and enjoy a nap. My personal practice is eating, napping. When it was completed, fresh weeds appeared. Now it's been lived in, covered by weeds. The person in the hut lives here calmly, not stuck to inside, outside, or in between. The same teaching is right inside this now more and more poetic form. It's the same heart of wisdom that's been passed on and realized generation to generation. If you want to know the undying person in the hut, what is it that doesn't die? This hut's going to come and go. What is the undying person in the hut? Don't separate from this skin bag right here, right now. Master Tozan's Song of Jewel Mirror Samadhi, 9th century. Turning away and touching are both wrong, for it's like a massive fire. Just to depict it in literary form is to stain it with defilements already. Words. Sozan's verse, 9th century. The essence of awareness is round, round and bright. The body without form. Do not force distance or closeness in knowledge or opinion. When thoughts differ, they obscure the mystic reality. When the mind diverges, it is not close to the path. When feelings distinguish myriad things, you sink into objects before you. Wushan's record. What is the abode of the real Buddha? Wushan said, using the subtlety of thinking without thought. Think back to the infinity of the flames of awareness. When thinking comes to an end, return to the source, where essence and form are eternal, and phenomenon and noumenon are non-dual. The real Buddha is beingness as it is. Mazu's record, Master Mazu. All of you should believe that your mind is Buddha, that this mind is identical with Buddha. The great Master Bodhidharma came from India to China, transmitted the one mind teaching of the Mahayana so that it can lead all of us to awakening. Fearing that you will be too confused and will not believe this one mind is inherent in all of you, he used the Lankavatara Sutra to seal the sentient being's mind ground. Therefore, in the Lankavatara Sutra, mind is the essence of all the Buddhist teachings. No gate is the Dharma gate, the gateless gate. If one wants to truly know the way directly, ordinary mind is the way. I mean, it just keeps going, folks. You see the pattern. Bai Shang's record, Huang Bo's transmission of mind, Lin Ji's record, Nanquan's record. Now it's just all the way to Dogen. It doesn't matter. Yunmen's record, Chongshan's record, Yan Wu's letters. It just keeps going. Hongxi. Once you get some taste for yourself, you can see that all these cats are playing the same tune. It's just they're playing it their own way, in a way that makes sense for them based on their causes and conditions and cultural understandings and everything like this. But clearly, the font of it is not contained in any words and letters. But clearly, words and letters matter. There's a ton of them. I've added to the dung pile myself here today. But hopefully it's for good reason and for good effect. Let us now return to the Lankavatara Sutra itself. Chapter 1. Let's see how far we can get this time. My plan here is to just simply read it, and I hope that you will hear it and receive it and maintain it. Thus have I heard. The Blessed One appeared in the castle of Lanka, which is on the summit of Mount Malaya, in the midst of the great ocean. A great many bodhisattva mahasattvas had miraculously assembled from all the Buddha lands, and a large number of bhikkhus were gathered there. The bodhisattva mahasattvas with Mahamati at their head were all perfect masters of the various samadhis, the tenfold self-mastery, the 10 powers, and the 6 psychic faculties. Having been anointed by the Buddha's own hands, they all well understood the significance of the objective world. And they all knew how to apply the various means, teachings, and disciplinary measures according to the various mentalities and behaviors of beings. They were all thoroughly versed in the 5 dharmas, the 3 svabhavas, the 8 vijnanas, and the twofold egolessnesses. Are we good up to that point? Good enough, all right. Now, let's just let it speak to us. Let it sing a little bit for us. The Blessed One, knowing of the mental agitations still going on in the minds of those assembled, like the surface of an ocean stirred into waves by the passing winds, and his great heart, moved by compassion, smiled. And he said, in the days of old, the Tathagatas of the past, who are arhats and fully enlightened ones, came to this castle of Lanka on Mount Malaya and discoursed on the truth of noble wisdom that is beyond reasoning and beyond the philosophers, as well as being beyond the understanding of ordinary disciples and ordinary masters, and which is realizable only within the inmost consciousness. For your sakes, I too would discourse on the same truth. All that is seen in the world is devoid of effort and action, because all things in the world are like a dream, or like an image miraculously projected. This is not comprehended by the philosophers and the ignorant, but those who thus see things see them truthfully. Those who see things otherwise walk in discriminations, and as they depend upon discrimination, they cling to dualism. The world, as seen by discrimination, is like seeing one's own image reflected in a mirror, or one's shadow, or the moon reflected in water, or an echo heard in the valley. People grasping their own shadows of discrimination become attached to this thing and that thing, and failing to abandon dualism, they go on forever discriminating, and thus never attain tranquility. By tranquility is meant oneness, and oneness gives birth to the highest samadhi, which is gained by entering into the realm of noble wisdom that is realizable only within one's inmost consciousness. Then, all the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas rose from their seats and respectfully paid him homage. And Mahamati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, sustained by the power of the Buddhas, drew his upper garment over one shoulder, knelt, and pressing his hands together, praised the Buddha in the following verses. As thou reviewest the world with thy perfect intelligence and compassion, it must seem to thee like an ethereal flower, of which one cannot say it is born, it is destroyed, for the terms being and non-being do not apply to it. As thou reviewest the world with thy perfect intelligence and compassion, it must seem to thee like a dream, of which it cannot be said, it is permanent, or it is destructible, for being and non-being do not apply to it. As thou reviewest all things by thy perfect intelligence and compassion, they must seem to thee like visions beyond the reach of human mind, as being and non-being do not apply to them. With thy perfect intelligence and compassion, which are beyond all limit, thou comprehendest the egolessness of things and persons, and are free and clear from the hindrances of passion and learning and egoism. Thou dost not vanish into nirvana, nor does nirvana abide in thee, for nirvana transcends all duality of knowing and known, of being and non-being. Those who see thus, serene and beyond conception, will be emancipated from attachment, will be cleansed of all defilement, both in this world and in the spiritual world beyond. In this world, whose nature is like a dream, there is place for praise and blame. But in the ultimate reality of Dharmakaya, which is far beyond the senses and of the discriminating mind, what is there to praise, O thou most wise? Then said Mahamati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, O Blessed One, the Sugata Arhat, the fully enlightened one, pray tell us about the realization of noble wisdom, which is beyond the path and usage of the philosophers, which is devoid of all predicates such as being and non-being, oneness and otherness, bothness and not bothness, existence and non-existence, eternity and non-eternity, which has nothing to do with individuality and generality, nor false imagination, nor any illusions arising from the mind itself, but which manifests itself as the truth of highest reality, by which, going up continuously by the stages of purification, one enters at last upon the stage of Tathagatahood, whereby the power of his original vows, unattended by any striving, one will radiate its influence to infinite worlds, like a gem reflecting its variegated colors, and whereby I and other Bodhisattva Mahasattvas will be enabled to bring all beings to the same perfection of virtue. Said the Blessed One, well done, Mahamati. And again, well done indeed. It is because of your compassion for the world, because of the benefit it will bring to many people, both humankind and celestial, that you have presented yourself before us to make this request. Therefore, Mahamati, listen well and truly reflect upon what I shall say, for I will instruct you. Then Mahamati and the other Bodhisattva Mahasattvas gave devout attention to the teaching of the Blessed One. Mahamati, the ignorant and simple-minded, not knowing that the world is only something seen of the mind itself, cling to the multitudinous of external objects, cling to notions of being and non-being, oneness and otherness, bothness and not bothness, existence and non-existence, eternity and non-eternity, and think that they have a self-nature of their own, all of which rises from the discriminations of the mind and is perpetuated by habit energy, and from which they are given over to false imagination. It's all like a mirage in which springs of water are seen as if they were real, which are thus imagined by animals who, made thirsty by the heat of the season, run after them. Animals, not knowing that the springs are hallucinations of their own minds, do not realize there are no such springs. In the same way, Mahamati, the ignorant and simple-minded, their minds burning with the fires of greed, anger, and ignorance, finding delight in a world of multitudinous forms, their thoughts obsessed with ideas of birth, with ideas of growth, with ideas of destruction, not well understanding what is meant by existent and non-existent, and being impressed by erroneous discriminations and speculations since beginningless time, fall into the habit of grasping this and grasping that, and thereby becoming attached to them. It is like the city of the Gandharvas, which the unwitting take to be a real city, though it is not in fact so. The city appears as in a vision owing to their attachment to the memory of a city preserved in the mind as a seed. The city can thus be said to be both existent and non-existent. In the same way, clinging to the memory of erroneous speculations and doctrines accumulated since beginningless time, they hold fast to such ideas as oneness and otherness, being and non-being, and their thoughts are not at all clear as to what, after all, is only seen of the mind. It's like a man dreaming in his sleep of a country that seems to be filled with various people, men, women, elephants, horses, cars, pedestrians, villages, towns, hamlets, cows, buffaloes, mansions, woods, mountains, rivers, lakes, and he moves about in that city until they are awakened. As they lie half awake and recall the city of their dreams and review their experiences there, what do you think, Mahamati? Is this dreamer who's letting their mind dwell upon the various unrealities they have seen in the dream, are they to be considered wise or foolish? In the same way, the ignorant and simple-minded who are favorably influenced by the erroneous views of philosophers and do not recognize that the views that are influencing them are only dream-like ideas originating in the mind itself. And consequently, they are held fast by their notions of oneness and otherness, of being and non-being. It's like a painter's canvas on which the ignorant imagine they see the elevations and depressions of mountains and valleys. In the same way, there are people today being brought up under the influence of similar erroneous views of oneness and otherness, of bothness and not bothness, whose mentality is being conditioned by the habit energy of these false imaginings, and who later on will declare those who hold the true doctrine of no birth, which is free from the alternatives of being and non-being, to be nihilists, and by so doing will bring themselves and others to ruin. By the natural law of cause and effect, these followers of pernicious views uproot meritorious causes that otherwise would lead to unstained purity. They are to be shunned by those whose desires are for more excellent things. It is like the dim-eyed ones who, seeing a hairnet, exclaim to one another, "It's wonderful, look." Their confidence is not well grounded. For this reason, Mahamati, you and other Bodhisattva Mahasattvas should cast off all discriminations leading to the notions of birth, abiding, and destructions, of oneness and otherness, of bothness and not bothness, of being and non-being, and thus getting free of the bondage of the habit energy. Become able to attain the reality realizable within yourselves of noble wisdom. Then said Mahamati to the Blessed One, why is it that the ignorant are given up to discrimination and the wise are not? The Blessed One replied, it is because the ignorant cling to names, signs, and ideas. As their minds move along these channels, they feed on multiplicities of objects and fall into the notion of an ego soul and what belongs to it. They make discriminations of good and bad amongst appearances and cling to the agreeable. And thus they cling. As they thus cling, there is a reversion to ignorance, and karma, born of greed, anger, and folly, is accumulated. As the accumulation of karma goes on, they become imprisoned in a cocoon of discrimination and are thenceforth unable to free themselves from the rounds of birth and death and suffering. Because of folly, they do not understand that all things are like Maya, like the reflection of the moon in the water, that there is no self-substance to be imagined as an ego soul and its belongings, and that all their definitive ideas rise from their false discriminations of what exists only as it is seen in the mind itself. They do not realize that things have nothing to do with qualified and qualifying, nor with the course of birth, abiding, and destruction, and instead, they assert that they are born of a creator, that they are born of time, that they are born of atoms, or that they are born of some celestial spirit. It is because the ignorant are given up to discrimination that they move along with the stream of appearances. But it is not so with the wise. 2. False imagination and knowledge of appearances. Then Mahamati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, spoke to the Blessed One, saying, "You speak of the erroneous views of the philosophers. Will you please tell us of them, that we may be on our guard against them?" The Blessed One replied, saying, "Mahamati, the error in these erroneous teachings that are generally held by the philosophers lies in this. They do not recognize that the objective world rises from the mind itself. They do not understand that the whole mind system also rises from the mind itself. But depending upon these manifestations of the mind as being real, they go on discriminating them, like the simple-minded ones that they are, cherishing the dualism of this and that, of being and non-being, ignorant of the fact that there is but one common essence. On the contrary, my teaching is based on the recognition that the objective world, like a vision, is a manifestation of the mind itself. It teaches the cessation of ignorance, desire, deed, and causality. It teaches the cessation of suffering that arises from the discriminations of the triple world of form, formlessness, and desire. There are some Brahmin scholars who, assuming something out of nothing, assert that there is a substance bound up with causation which abides in time, and that the elements that make up personality and its environment have their genesis and continuation in causation, and after thus existing pass away. Then there are other scholars who hold a destructive and nihilistic view concerning such subjects as continuation, activity, breaking up, existence, nirvana, the path, karma, fruition, and truth. Why? Because they have not attained an intuitive understanding of truth itself, and therefore they have no clear insight into the fundamentals of things. They are like a jar broken into pieces, which is no longer able to function as a jar. They are like a burnt seed, which is no longer capable of sprouting. But the elements that make up personality and its environment, which they regard as subject to change, are really incapable of uninterrupted transformations. Their views are based upon erroneous discriminations of the objective world. They are not based upon the true conception. Again, if it is true that something comes of nothing, then there is rise of the mind system by reason of the combination of the three effect-producing causes. We could say the same of any non-existing thing. For instance, that a tortoise could grow hair or sand produce oil. It turns out that one can happen. Who knew? This proposition is of no avail. It ends in affirming nothing. It follows that the deed, work, and cause of which they speak is of no use, and so also is their reference to being a non-being. If they argue that there is a combination of the three effect-producing causes, they must do it on the principle of cause and effect. That is, something comes out of nothing and not out of nothing. As long as a world of relativity is asserted, there is an ever-recurring chain of causation which cannot be denied under any circumstance. Therefore, we cannot talk of anything coming to an end or of cessation. As long as these scholars remain on their philosophical ground, their demonstration must conform to logic and their textbooks, and the memory habit of erroneous intellection will ever cling to them. To make the matters worse, the simple-minded ones, poisoned by this erroneous view, will declare this incorrect way of thinking taught by the ignorant to be the same as that presented by the all-knowing one. But the way of instruction presented by the Tathagatas is not based on assertions and refutations by means of words and logic. But the way of instruction presented by the Tathagatas is not based on assertions and refutations based on the meaning of words and logic. There are 4 forms of assertion that can be made concerning things not in existence, namely, assertions made about individual marks that are not in existence, about objects that are not in existence, about a cause that is non-existent, and about philosophical views that are erroneous. By refutation is meant that one, because of ignorance, has not examined properly the error that lies at the basis of all these assertions. The assertion about individual marks that really have no existence concerns the distinctive marks as perceived by the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, as indicating individuality, and generally in the elements that make up personality and its external world. And then taking these marks for reality and getting attached to them, they get into the habit of affirming things and are just so and not otherwise. The assertion about objects that are non-existent is an assertion that rises from attachment to those associated marks of individuality and generality. Objects in themselves are neither in existence nor in non-existence. They are quite devoid of the alternatives of being and not being, and should only be thought of as one thinks of the horns of a hare, the horns of a horse, or the horns of a camel, which have never existed. Objects are discriminated by the ignorant who are addicted to assertion and negation, because their intelligence has not been acute enough to penetrate into the truth that there is nothing but what is seen of the mind itself. The assertion of a cause that is non-existent assumes the causeless birth in the first element of the mind system, which later on comes to have only a Maya-like non-existence. That is to say, there are philosophers who assert that an originally unborn mind system begins to function under the conditions of I, form, light, and memory, which functioning goes on for a time and then ceases. This is an example of a cause that is non-existent. The assertion of philosophical views concerning the elements that make up personality and its environing world that are non-existent assume the existence of an ego, a being, a soul, a living being, a nourisher, or a spirit. This is an example of philosophical views that are not true. It is this combination of discrimination of imaginary marks of individuality. It is this combination of discrimination of imaginary marks of individuality, grouping them, giving them a name, and becoming attached to them as objects by reason of habit energy that has been accumulating since beginningless time, that one builds up erroneous views whose only basis is false imagination. For this reason, bodhisattvas should avoid all discussions relating to assertions and negations whose only basis is words and logic. I'm going to read that again. It is this combination of discrimination of imaginary marks of individuality, grouping them, giving them a name, seeing how they intersect, and becoming attached to them as objects, by reason of habit energy that has been accumulating since beginningless time. That one builds up erroneous views whose only basis is false imagination. For this reason, bodhisattvas should avoid all discussions relating to assertions and negations whose only basis is words and logic. Word discrimination goes on by the coordination of brain, chest, nose, throat, palate, lips, tongue, teeth. Words are neither different nor not different from discrimination. Words are neither different nor not different from discrimination. Words rise from discrimination as their cause. If words were different from discrimination, they could not have a discrimination for their cause. Then again, if words are not different, they could not carry and express meaning. Words, therefore, are produced by causation and are mutually conditioning and shifting, just like things are subject to birth and destruction. There are 4 kinds of word discrimination, all of which are to be avoided because they are all alike unreal. First, there are words indicating individual marks which arise from discriminating forms and signs as being real in and of themselves, and then becoming attached to them. There are memory words which rise from the unreal surroundings which come before the mind when it recalls some previous experience. Then there are words growing out of attachment to the erroneous distinctions and speculations of the mental process itself. And finally, there are words growing out of inherited prejudices as seeds of habit energy that have accumulated since beginningless time, or which had their origin in some long forgotten clinging to false imaginations and erroneous speculations. Then there are words where there are no corresponding objects, as for instance, a hare's horn, a barren woman's child, etc. There are no such things, but we have the words just the same. Words are artificial creation. There are Buddha lands where there are no words. In some Buddha lands, ideas are indicated by looking steadily. In others, by gestures. And still others by a frown, by a movement of the eyes, by laughing, by yawning, which I've been seeing a bit of, by the clearing of the throat, or by trembling, which you may see. For instance, in the Buddha land of the Tathagata Samantabhadra Bodhisattvas, by jhana transcending words and ideas, attain the recognition of all things as unborn. And they also experience various most excellent samadhis that transcend words. Even in this world, such specialized beings as ants and bees carry on their activities very well, without recourse to words. No, Mahamati, the validity of things is independent of the validity of words. Moreover, there are other things that belong to words, namely the syllable body of words, the name body of words, the sentence body of words. By syllable body is meant that by which words and sentences are set up or indicated. There is a reason for some syllables. Some are mnemonic, some are chosen arbitrarily. By name body is meant the object depending on which a name word obtains its significance, or in other words, name body is the substance of a name word. By sentence body is meant the completion of the meaning by expressing the words more fully in a sentence. The name for the sentence body is suggested by the footprints left in the road, by elephants, horses, people, deer, cattle, goats, etc. But neither words nor sentences can exactly express meanings. For words are only sweet sounds that are arbitrarily chosen to represent things. They are not the things themselves, which in turn are only themselves manifestations of mind. Neither words or sentences can exactly express meanings, for words are only sweet sounds that are arbitrarily chosen to represent things. They are not the things themselves, which in turn are only manifestations of mind. Discrimination of meaning is based upon the false imagination that these sweet sounds, which we call words, and which are dependent upon whatever subjects they are supposed to stand for, and which subjects are supposed to be self-existent, all of which is based on error. Disciples should be on their guard against the seduction of words and sentences and their elusive meanings, for by them the ignorant and dull-witted become entangled and helpless as an elephant floundering about in deep mud. Words and sentences are produced by the law of causation and are mutually conditioning. They cannot express highest reality. Moreover, in highest reality, there are no differences to be discriminated, and there is nothing to be predicated in regard to it. Highest reality is an exalted state of bliss. It is not a state of word discrimination, and it cannot be entered into by mere statements concerning it. The Tathagatas have a better way of teaching, namely through self-realization of noble wisdom. Self-realization of noble wisdom. We'll take a break there and come back for more.
like ones that we, what's that? I don't know. I think it has like 4 or 5, but I mean, they could be different editions too. That would be okay, like this. I think. This is really good. Red.
What does that mean, epitomized version?
It's the Cliff Notes. No, I'm joking. Kind of. Is it? Yeah. I don't know. This has all kinds of
And that's written by,
notes.
okay.
Yeah, this is the one. This is only $5 on Amazon. Yeah, this is the one that they recommended for Ango.
Right.
Translated
And I
by
think
white.
the PDF is just, but you can download it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I do better with this because I probably won't print off this PDF, which means it was in my computer and not on my shelf where I will go and look at it. So this is my hack for myself. I will pay $5 so that I will actually look at it and it doesn't just hang out in cyberspace. But this is what I'm getting actually.
Right, that's what I have.
You have this one?
Yeah.
But it's kind of reading
But
a separate reading, like you can't, they don't follow along. That's what we were just talking about.
Oh, I
You
see.
can't, like you'll find on the footnote on page 16 here, you can't find that.
Right.
Right, everyone with red pine was kind of trying to figure out where it's reading from, but it doesn't correspond.
But it does explain lots of things.
Yeah. Yes, my kids here. I realize that we actually are.
Like making something, I might have ordered decorated this month, but or it's been kind of too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I still feel
This is like part of
a little sloshy, a little soup sloshy in that.
It was sort of a bit. Isn't it beautiful?
Yes, it is. And they very beautiful.
The soundboard. That's like I took the metal harp thing off, and that was this. And this was my vision.
They're in routine.
Takes, cut off.
Sometimes that is like a way of a huge improvement. It is, because when they're not in routine, then you're like,
But
you're doing mental energy.
it's the family practice.
Even if it's like good or not work hard, it's still a lot of like,
I'm Zen practice.
especially when you're like the matriarch, right? I think. Really got to bring it all the time. So yes, exactly.
So,
I know every piece of the piano is a whole
What a disappointment, because I can hear the rattle of the wrappers. I know you've got a pocket full.
Mostly garbage.
Oh, never mind. You have everything you need.
They do.
You are perfect and complete, lacking nothing.
I think I'm working the sleep, lacking less.
So you did some gardening while you were down there?
well, yeah, this is how I'm understanding. These are some race beds in Ango. My son, he's in a group home, and he's and that's Fat Willie's fish shack. This is what it ended up being.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I would still exist in that.
Right?
Yeah, that is really nice.
Yeah, and like this bit here,
Uh-huh.
I made this, and this is the where,
Yeah, that's
it
right.
pulls out. So, both pole knots are in there. So,
So did your sister, was she gonna hang out her wall?
she's hanging down her wall. There, that's what I ended up with. And she's hanging it straight up and down. So she's like,
Yes. And that's good, so we can play.
here's the, this is a ball. Ball.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's up on piano. This was a serial number.
That we
That's kind of cool, man.
like a park.
Is that
It's my daughter.
No, it's true.
What's this little kid? Lindsay?
Yeah, and Toby can
That's my sister. This is it, murder in which that's a meeting with my uncle. It's a concert with you.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, but that's it about the piano.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So what's the
Huh?
No, she didn't see it.
Are you keeping something from me?
Yes, I am.
Is it
I'm gonna go to the restaurant. I'll show
Did you buy us a restroom? Is it in the restroom? That's where I'm gonna head. But I love it. You're being mischievous. One of the things I like about it. Maybe I'll take a little mischief. No. Never give up an opportunity. There has to be a little bit of right? It's their effort to keep us alert. Me and Rinsen, he's ever heard of a group called Postmodern Jukebox? Because I got tickets to go see them. I'm so excited. Well, they take like modern music. It could be pop music, it could be indie, and they kind of like reinvent it in jazz, or band, or swing, or ragtime, doo-wop. And so it's like completely unexpected, and they dress, Perry Mason. It's very impactful. But it's so much fun. And I've never seen them live. I just got tickets for a while.
little sugar rush.
Uh-huh.
Most of used to be really bad, but it's not actually merged. Someone recorded it. No, what do you do that? And so it doesn't sound like virtual.
Hey, that was weird people.
I think that all.
No. Patient. Regular cabinet.
He's the old man next to you. Wow, that's not old.
So our road has a little bit of a fork in it here. I can either keep reading on and just presenting the sutra, or it occurred to Sensei that we haven't actually done any triad stuff so far today. So we could do either or. We could break into threes and just have some conversation amongst each other and hopefully come up with some questions and prompts for more conversation together with me. Or we can just keep reading on and see where that takes us. I don't really have a strong preference. If you think triads would be the way to go, put a thumb up. If you think, no, let's not have triads be what we do, give a thumb down. If you could go either way, give me just a neutral thumb. You have to thumb something. Okay, that's interesting. So we've got like 1, 2 saying let's talk, and most are neutral, and the rest, the dominated is let's just keep going through the sutra. Okay. All right, that is so the Sangha has decided. Let me just make a few comments then before I continue reading. As you probably have noticed, if not before, it's a dense teaching, okay? Again, do not let yourself get too stuck on the details of which philosophical refutation are we at again and stuff. What you need to know is that he existed in a time where there was deep philosophical speculation going on all over the place. You know, in the days of Plato and Socrates, there's a lot of schools of thought going back and forth. Buddha didn't exist in a serene little vacuum somewhere, right? So he's needing to respond to things of the day, okay? And so that's what's going on. If you don't completely track every single sentence and why he said what, no kidding. You know, if you want to, it's all parsed out. Red Pine explains things. I can't pretend to know all that stuff myself. What I do know is every now and then he brings it. Basically, the way I hear that is, you know, the philosophical this, that, come on, it's mind itself. And then some people go and whatever they say, but you know, it's mind, it's just mind, guys. Okay, that's kind of how I hear it. It always cadences back to that same, you make this essential mistake and they don't see it. No matter how fancy the words are or how interesting their metaphysical assertions may be. Does that make sense? And then also, it's important that, you know, this is my own personal, this is the book that I bought back in the probably 90s, early 90s. And so I've been in exchange with this for decades. And so there'll come moments where I can see me like not liking what I'm reading or going, oh my God, that's fantastic. And there's about a 7-year span between the comments, you know, stuff like that. So every now and then, if I hit one that has been of particular use to me, I may or may not read it a couple of times for you just to emphasize it. But if anybody cares to, you're welcome to gander at my marginalia and underlinings just to see it. I recommend you, well, if you're going to be a good reader, you should have a digital copy so you can have it with you always. You should have a primary clean copy that you keep and have one that you use for all your notes. There, book sales. Okay, in this book, I have us at the top of page 17. Does that track on the other editions as well? Not. Jigen, where does that one put us? 15? Oh, great. There's only 125. We're doing great. False imagination by this one. Okay, let's press on and see what comes. In my edition, it's the top of page 17, continuing with chapter 2, false imagination. Let's see here. Mahamati asked the Blessed One, pray, tell us about the causation of all things, whereby I and other bodhisattvas may see into the nature of causation and may no more discriminate it as to the gradual or simultaneous rising of all things. The Blessed One replied, there are 2 factors of causation by reason of which all things come into seeming existence, external factors and internal factors. The external factors are a lump of clay, a stick, a wheel, a thread, water, a worker and his labor, the combination of all of which produces a jar. As with a jar which is made from a lump of clay or a piece of cloth from thread, or matting made from fragrant grass, or a sprout growing out of a seed, or fresh butter made from sour milk by a person churning it, so it is with all things which appear one after another in continuous succession. As regards the inner factors of causation, they are of such kinds as ignorance, desire, purpose, all of which enter into the idea of causation. Born of these 2 factors, there is the manifestation of personality and the individual things that make up the personality's environment. But they are not individual and distinctive things. They are only so discriminated by the ignorant. Causation may be divided into 6 elements: indifference cause, dependence cause, possibility cause, agency cause, objectivity cause, manifesting cause. Indifference cause means that if there is no discrimination present, then there is no power of combination present. And so no combination takes place. Or if present, there is dissolution. Dependence cause means that the elements must be present. Possibility cause means that when a cause is to become effective, there must be a suitable meeting of conditions. When a cause is to become effective, there must be a suitable meeting of causes, both internal and external. Agency cause means that there must be a principle vested with supreme authority, like a sovereign king present and asserting itself. Objectivity cause means that to be part of the objective world, the mind system must be in existence and must be keeping up its continuous activity. Manifesting cause means that as the discriminating faculty of the mind system becomes busy individual marks will be revealed, as forms are revealed by the light of a lamp. All causes are thus seen to be the outcome of discrimination carried on by the ignorant and simple-minded. And there is, therefore, no such thing as gradual or simultaneous rising of existence. If such a thing as the gradual rising of existence is asserted, it can be disproved by showing there is no basic substance to hold the individual signs together, which makes a gradual rising impossible. If simultaneous rising of existence is asserted, there would be no distinction between cause and effect, and there will be nothing to characterize a cause as such. While a child is not yet born, the term father has no significance. Logicians argue that there is that which is born and that which gives birth by the mutual functioning of such causal factors such as cause, substance, continuity, acceleration, etc. And so they conclude that there is a gradual rising of existence. But this gradual rising does not obtain except by reason of attachment to the notion of self-nature. When ideas of body, property, and abode are seen, discriminated, and cherished in what after all is nothing but what is conceived by the mind itself, the external world is perceived under the aspects of individuality and generality, which, however, are not realities, and therefore neither a gradual nor a simultaneous rising of things is possible. It is only when the mind system comes into activity and discriminates the manifestations of mind that existence can said to come into view. It is only when the mind system comes into activity and discriminates the manifestations of mind that existence can be said to come into view. For these reasons, Mahamati, you must get rid of notions of gradual and simultaneity in combination of causal activities. Mahamati said, Blessed One, to what kind of discrimination and to what kinds of thoughts should the term false imagination be applied? The Blessed One replied, so long as people do not understand the true nature of the objective world, they fall into the dualistic view of things. They imagine the multiplicity of external objects to be real and become attached to them and are nourished by their habit energy. Because of this system of mentation, mind and what belongs to it is discriminated and thought of as real. This leads to the assertion of an ego soul and its belongings, and thus the mind system goes on functioning. Depending upon and attaching itself to the dualistic habit of mind, they accept the views of the philosophers founded upon these erroneous distinctions of being and non-being, existence and non-existence. And there evolves what we call false imaginations. But Mahamati, discrimination does not evolve, nor is it put away, because when all that is seen is truly recognized to be nothing but the manifestation of mind, how can discrimination in regards being and non-being evolve? It is for the sake of the ignorant who are addicted to the discrimination of the multiplicity of things, which are their own mind, that it is said by me that discrimination takes its rise owing to attachment to the aspects of multiplicity, which is characteristics of objects. How otherwise can the ignorant and simple-minded recognize that there is nothing but what is seen of mind itself? And how otherwise can they gain insight into the true nature of mind and be able to free themselves from wrong conceptions of cause and effect? How otherwise can they gain a clear conception of the bodhisattva stages and attain a turning about in the deepest seat of their consciousness? And attain a turning about in the deepest seat of their consciousness. And finally attain an inner realization of noble wisdom, which transcends the five dharmas, the three self-natures, and the whole idea of a discriminated reality. For this reason, it is said by me that discrimination takes its rise from the mind becoming attached to the multiplicities of things, which in themselves are not real, and that emancipation comes from thoroughly understanding the meaning of reality as it truly is. Discrimination takes its rise from the mind becoming attached to the multiplicities of things which in themselves are not real, and that emancipation comes from thoroughly understanding the meaning of reality as reality truly is. False imaginations rise from the consideration of appearances. Things are discriminated as to forms, signs, and shape, as to having color, warmth, humidity, motility, or rigidity. False imagination consists in becoming attached to these appearances and their names. By attachment to objects is meant getting attached to the inner and outer things as if they were real. By attachment to names is meant the recognition in these inner and outer things of the characteristic marks of individuality and generality, and to regard them as definitely belonging to the names of their objects. False imagination teaches that because all things are bound up with the causes and conditions of habit energy that have been accumulating since beginningless time, by not recognizing that the external world is of mind itself, all things are comprehensible under the aspects of individuality and generality. By reason of clinging to these false imaginations, there is multitudinous of appearances which are imagined to be real, but which are only imaginary. To illustrate, when a magician, depending on grass, wood, shrubs, creepers, exercises their art, many shapes and beings take form that are only magically created. Sometimes they even make figures that have bodies and then move and act like human beings. They are variously and fancifully discriminated, but there is no reality in them. Everyone but children and the simple-minded know that they are not real. Likewise, based upon the notion of relativity, false imagination perceives a variety of appearances which the discriminating mind proceeds to objectify and name and become attached to, and memory, habit, energy perpetuates. Here is all that is necessary to constitute the self-nature of false imagination. The various features of false imagination can be distinguished as follows regarding words, meanings, individual marks, property, self-nature, cause, philosophical views, reasoning, birth, no birth, dependence, bondage, and emancipation. Discrimination of words is the becoming attached to various sounds carrying familiar meanings. Discrimination of meaning comes when one imagines that words rise dependent upon whatever subjects they express, and which subjects are regarded as self-existent. Discrimination of individual marks is to imagine that whatever is denoted in words concerning the multiplicities of individual marks, which in themselves are like a mirage, is true, and clinging tenaciously to them. To discriminate all things according to such categories as warmth, fluidity, motility, and solidity. Discrimination of property is to desire a state of wealth, such as gold, silver, and various precious stones. Discrimination of self-nature is to make discriminations according to the views of the philosophers in reference to the self-nature of all things, which they imagine and stoutly maintain to be true, saying, "This is just what it is and it cannot be otherwise." Discrimination of cause is to distinguish the notion of causation in reference to being and non-being, and to imagine that there are such things as cause signs. Discrimination of philosophical views means considering different views relating to the notions of being and non-being, oneness and otherness, bothness and not bothness, existence and non-existence, all of which are erroneous and becoming attached to particular views. Discrimination of reasoning means the teaching whose reasoning is based on the grasping of the notion of an ego substance and what belongs to it. Discrimination of birth means getting attached to the notion that things come into existence and pass out of existence according to causation. Discrimination of no birth is to see that causeless substances which were not come into existence by reason of causation. Discrimination of dependence means the mutual dependence of gold and the filament made of it. Discrimination of bondage and imagination is like imagining that there is something bound because of something binding, and in the case of a man who ties a knot and loosens one. These are the various features of false imagination to which all the ignorant and simple-minded cling. Those attached to the notion of relativity are attached to the notion of the multitudinous of things, which arises from false imagination. It is like seeing varieties of objects depending on Maya, but these varieties, thus revealing themselves, are discriminated by the ignorant as something other than Maya itself, according to their way of thinking. Now, the truth is, Maya and the varieties of objects are neither different nor not different. If they were different, varieties of objects would not have Maya for their characteristic. If they are not different, there would be no distinction between them. But as there is this distinction between these two, Maya and the varieties of objects are neither differentiated nor not different, for the very good reason that they are one thing. Mahamati then said to the Blessed One, "Is error an entity or not?" The Blessed One replied, "Error has no character in it, making for attachment. If error had such a character, no liberation would be possible from its attachment to existence, and the chain of origination would only be understood in the sense of creation as upheld by the philosophers. Error is like Maya, and as Maya is incapable from producing other Maya, so error in itself cannot produce error. It is discrimination and attachment that produce evil thoughts and faults. Moreover, Maya has no power of discrimination in itself. It only rises when invoked by the charm of the magician. Error has in itself no habit energy. Habit energy only rises from discrimination and attachment. Error in itself has no habit energy. Habit energy only rises from discrimination and attachment. Error in itself has no faults. Faults are due to the confused discrimination fondly cherished by the ignorant concerning the ego soul and its mind. Error in itself has no faults. The faults are due only to the confused discriminations fondly cherished by the ignorant concerning the ego soul and its mind. The wise have nothing to do with either, with Maya or with error. Maya, however, is not an unreality because it only has the appearance of reality. All things have the nature of Maya. It is not because all things are imagined and clung to because of the multitudinous of individual signs that they are like Maya. It is because they are alike unreal and as quickly appearing and disappearing. Being attached to erroneous thoughts, they confuse and contradict themselves and others, and they do not clearly grasp the fact that the world is no more than the mind itself. They imagine and cling to causation. They imagine and cling to their work, to their birth, to individual signs, and their thoughts are characterized by error and false discriminations. The teaching that all things are characterized by the self-nature of Maya in a dream is meant to make the ignorant and simple-minded cast aside the idea of self-nature in anything. False imagination teaches that such things as light and shade, long and short, black and white are different and are to be discriminated, but they are not independent of each other. They are only different aspects of the same thing. and they are terms of relation. They are not terms of reality. False imagination teaches that such things as light and dark, long and short, black and white are different, and they are to be discriminated. But they are not independent of each other. They are only different aspects of the same thing. They are terms of relation. They are not terms of reality. Conditions of existence are not of a mutually exclusive character. In essence, they are not two, but one. Even nirvana and samsara's world of life and death are aspects of the same thing, for there is no nirvana except where is samsara, and no samsara except where is nirvana. All duality is falsely imagined. Mahamati, you and all the bodhisattvas should discipline yourselves in the realization and patient acceptance of the truths of the emptiness, unbornness, no self-natureness, and non-duality of all things. This teaching is found in all the sutras and all the Buddhas, and is presented to meet the varied dispositions of all beings, but it is not the truth itself. These teachings are only a finger pointing toward noble wisdom. They are like a mirage with its springs of water, which the deer take to be real and chase after. So with the teachings in all the sutras. They are intended for the consideration and the guidance of the discriminating minds of all people, but they are not the truth itself, which can only be self-realized within one's own deepest consciousness. Mahamati, you and all the bodhisattvas must seek for this inner self-realization of noble wisdom and be not captivated by word teachings. Concludes chapter 2. Chapter 3. Right knowledge, or knowledge of relations. Then Mahamati said, "Pray, Blessed One, tell us about this being and the non-being of all things." The Blessed One replied, "People of this world are dependent in their thinking on one of two things: on the notion of being, whereby they take pleasure in realism, or in the notion of non-being, whereby they take pleasure in nihilism. In either case, they imagine emancipation where there is no emancipation. Those who are dependent upon the notion of being regard the world as rising from a causation that is really existent, that it is actually existing, and becoming world does not take its rise from a causation that is non-existent. This is the realistic view as held by some. Then there are others who are dependent on the notion of non-being of all things. These people admit the existence of greed, anger, and ignorance, and at the same time they deny the existence of the things that produce greed, anger, and ignorance. This is not rational, for greed, anger, and ignorance are no more to be taken hold of as real than other things. They neither have substance nor individual marks. Where there is a state of bondage, there is binding and means for binding. But where there is emancipation, as in the case of Buddhas, bodhisattvas, masters, and disciples who have ceased to believe in both being and non-being, there is neither bondage, binding, nor means for binding. It is better to cherish the notion of an ego substance than to entertain the notion of emptiness derived from the view of being and non-being. For those who so believe fail to understand the fundamental fact that the external world is nothing but a manifestation of mind. Because they see things as transient, as rising from cause and passing away from cause, now dividing, now combining into the elements which make up the aggregates of personality and its external world, and now passing away, they are doomed to suffer every moment from the changes that follow one after another, and finally are doomed to ruin. Then Mahamati asked the Blessed One, saying, "Tell us, Blessed One, how all things can be empty, unborn, and have no self-nature, so that we may be awakened and quickly realize the highest enlightenment." The Blessed One replied, "What is emptiness indeed? It is a term whose very self-nature is false imagination. But because of one's attachment to false imagination, we are obliged to talk about emptiness, no birth, and no self-nature. There are 7 kinds of emptiness. Emptiness of mutuality, which is non-existent, emptiness of individual marks, emptiness of self-nature, emptiness of no work, emptiness of work, emptiness of all things in the sense that they are unpredictable, emptiness in its highest sense of ultimate reality. By the emptiness of mutuality, which is non-existence, is meant that when a thing is missing here, one speaks of it as being empty here. For instance, in the lecture hall of Miragama, there are no elephants present, nor bulls, nor sheep. But as to monks, there are many present. We can rightly speak of the hall as being empty as far as animals are concerned. It is not asserted that the lecture hall is empty of its own characteristics, or that the monks are empty of that which makes up their monkhood, nor that in some other place there are no elephants, bulls, nor sheep to be found. In this case, we are speaking of things in their aspect of individuality and generality, but from the point of view of mutuality, some things do not exist somewhere. This is the lowest form of emptiness and is to be sedulously put away. By emptiness of individual marks is meant that all things have no distinguishing marks of individuality and generality. Because of mutual relations and interactions, things are superficially discriminated, but when they are further and more carefully investigated and analyzed, they are seen to be non-existent, and nothing as to individuality and generality can be predicted of them, can be predicated of them. Thus, when individual marks can no longer be seen, ideas of self, otherness, and bothness no longer hold good. So it must be said that all things are empty of self-marks. By emptiness of self-nature is meant that all things in their self-nature are unborn. Therefore, it is said that things are empty as to self-nature. By emptiness of no work is meant that the aggregates of elements that makes up personality and its external world is nirvana itself, and from the beginning there is no activity in them. Therefore, one speaks of the emptiness of no work. By emptiness of work is meant that the aggregates, being devoid of an ego and its belongings, go on functioning automatically as there is mutual conjunction of causes and conditions. Thus, one speaks of the emptiness of work. By emptiness of all things, in the sense that they are unpredictable, is meant that as the very nature of false imagination is inexpressible, so all things are unpredictable, and therefore are empty in that sense. By emptiness in the highest sense of emptiness, ultimate reality is meant that in the attainment of inner self-realization of noble wisdom, there is no trace of habit energy generated by erroneous conceptions. Thus, one speaks of the highest emptiness of ultimate reality. When things are examined by right knowledge, there are no signs obtainable which would characterize them with marks of individuality and generality. Therefore, they are said to have no self-nature. Because these signs of individuality and generality are seen both as existing and yet are known to be non-existent, are seen as going out, and yet are known not to be going out. They are never annihilated. Why is this true? For this reason. Because the individual signs that should make up the self-nature of all things are non-existent. And again, in their self-nature, things are both eternal and non-eternal. Things are non-eternal because their marks of individuality appear and disappear. That is, the marks of self-nature are characterized by non-eternality. On the other hand, because things are unborn and are only mind-made, they are in a deep sense eternal. That is, things are eternal because of their very non-eternality. Further, besides understanding the emptiness of all things, both in regard to the substance and self-nature, it is necessary for bodhisattvas to clearly understand that all things are unborn. It is not asserted that things are not born in a superficial sense, but that in a deep sense they are not born of themselves. All that can be said is this, that relatively speaking, there is a constant stream of becoming, a momentary and uninterrupted change from one state of appearance to another. When it is recognized that the world as it presents itself is no more than a manifestation of mind, then birth is seen as no birth. And all existing objects concerning which discrimination asserts that they are and are not and non-existent and therefore unborn, being devoid of agent and action, things are unborn. If things are not born of being and non-being, but are simply manifestations of mind itself, they have no reality, no self-nature. They are like the horns of a hare, the horns of a horse, the horns of a donkey or of a camel. But the ignorant and simple-minded who are given over to false and erroneous imaginations discriminate things where they are not. To the ignorant, the characteristic marks of the self-nature of body, property, and abode seem to be fundamental and rooted in the very nature of mind itself. So they discriminate their multitudinuses and become attached to them. There are two kinds of this attachment to objects as having self-nature and attachment to words as having self-nature. The first takes place by not knowing that the external world is only a manifestation of mind itself, and the second arises from one's clinging to words and names by reason of habit energy. In the teaching of no birth, causation is out of place, because seeing that all things are like Maya in a dream, one does not discriminate individual signs. That all things are unborn and have no self-nature because they are like Maya is asserted to meet the thesis of the philosophers that birth is by causation. They foster the notion that the birth of all things is derived from the concept of being and non-being, and fail to regard it as it truly is, as caused by attachment to the multitudinuses which arises from the discriminations of the mind itself. Those who believe in the birth of something that has never been in existence and coming into existence vanishes away are obliged to assert that things come to exist and vanish away by causation. Such people find no foothold in my teachings. When it is realized that there is nothing born and nothing passes away, then there is no way to admit being and non-being, and the mind becomes quiescent. Then Mahamati said to the Blessed One, the philosophers declare that the world rises from causal agencies according to a law of causation. They state that their cause is unborn and not to be annihilated. They mention 9 primary elements, Ishvara, the creator, the creations, atoms, etc., which, being elementary, are unborn and not to be annihilated. The Blessed One, while teaching that all things are unborn and that there is no annihilation, also declares that the world takes its rise from ignorance, discrimination, attachment, deed, etc., working according to the law of causation. Though the two sets of elements differ in form and name, there does not appear to be any essential difference between the two positions. If there is anything that is distinctive and superior in the Blessed One's teaching, pray tell us. Blessed One, what is it? The Blessed One replied, my teaching of no birth and no annihilation is not like that of the philosophers, nor is it like their doctrine of birth and impermanency. That to which the philosophers ascribe the characteristic of no birth and no annihilation is the self-nature of all things, which causes them to fall into the dualism of being and non-being. My teaching transcends the whole conception of being and non-being. It has nothing to do with birth, abiding, and destruction, nor with existence and non-existence. I teach that the multitudinuses of objects have no reality in themselves, but are only seen of the mind, and therefore are of the nature of Maya and a dream. I teach the non-existence of things because they carry no signs of any inherent self-nature. It is true that in one sense they are seen and discriminated by the senses as individualized objects, but in another sense, because of the absence of any characteristic marks of self-nature, they are not seen, but they are only imagined. In one sense, they are graspable, but in another sense, they are not graspable. When it is clearly understood that there is nothing in the world but what is seen of the mind itself, discrimination no more rises, and the wise are established in their true abode, which is the realm of quietude. The ignorant discriminate and work, trying to adjust themselves to external conditions, and are constantly perturbed in mind. Unrealities are imagined and discriminated, while realities are unseen and ignored. It is not so with the wise. To illustrate, what the ignorant see is like a magically created city of the Gandharvas, where children are shown streets and houses and phantom merchants and people going in and coming out. This imaginary city with its streets and houses and people going in and coming out are not thought of as being born or being annihilated, because in their case there is no question as to their existence or non-existence. In like manner, I teach that there is nothing made nor unmade, that there is nothing that has connection with birth and destruction, except as the ignorant cherish falsely imagined notions as to the reality of the external world. When objects are not seen and judged as they truly are in themselves, there is discrimination and clinging to the notion of being and non-being, and individualized self-nature. As long as these notions of individuality and self-nature persist, the philosophers are bound to explain the external world by a law of causation. This position raises the question of a first cause, which the philosophers meet by asserting that their first cause, Ishvara, and the primal elements are unborn and unannihilate, which position is without evidence and is irrational. Ignorant people and worldly philosophers cherish a kind of no birth, but it is not the no birth which I teach. I teach the unbornness of the unborn essence of all things, while teaching is established in the minds of the wise by their self-realization of noble wisdom. A ladle, clay, a vessel, a wheel, or seeds, or elements, these are external conditions. Ignorance, discrimination, attachment, habit, karma, these are inner conditions. When this entire universe is regarded as concaternation, what is that word, concaternation? And is nothing else but concaternation, then the mind, by its patient acceptance of the truth that all things are unborn, gains tranquility. Thus ends chapter 3. So I see that we're coming upon our last chunk of time. I think what would be wise for us to do is let's take another little break. And then this would be the time for us to have some conversation together. If there's anything from the morning session that needs to be ruminated over a bit more, I'm willing to indulge. And then what I'm hoping is that, I mean, a lot of that is pretty thick stuff. But if you keep in mind the basic schematic of what's being talked about, it's not really that inscrutable, is it? Hopefully it's a little more digestible, a little more relatable. So let's take maybe a 15-minute break. Should we do formal triads or should we just do popcorn? Just popcorn individual? Okay. That carries the day. So
Popcorn.
yeah, popcorn it is. All right, so let's take, say 15, we'll come back, and then Q&A for the rest. Thank you, everybody.
Right there. He's just like, you know, that's just dumb. Just without evidence and is irrational. So, moving on. If you think this, we travel down this path of logic, and eventually you get to what started all of this. And so then we make something up. We don't know, so we make it up.
A little earlier section where it says, and it's just kind of sad when there's some people who hear that and think that it's true. This is proxy or
Just kind of sad. The Buddha's tea right there.
Oh, they had a shower there. The guy didn't say I couldn't use it, so I used it. He's like, you're free to leave whenever you're ready. I'm like, okay. He left the room. I'm like, I'm in the shower.
Koju, we need her.
Recording stopped.
Presume you're talking to this particular spot in my spine. This particular back muscle,
Just
right
that part,
here,
right
just
there.
this one is the kid you're speaking to.
Recording in progress.
All right, everybody, we're coming into the home stretch for the day here. It's far more taxing on me to just read than it is to talk, but I'm happy to do so. So, questions, prompts. Anyone have anything they'd like to ask?
Yes.
Seeing none, okay. All right, Shinyu, have at it.
Yes. The last couple of Wednesdays, Sensei has been teaching on case 41 in the Gateless Gate, where the second patriarch, Hoinang, if I remember right, no, Wike, can't remember which one it was now, Wike, wants his mind pacified, so he goes to Bodhidharma. And I just kept thinking about that a lot as we were listening to you read these sections on how by patient acceptance of the truth that all things are unborn, then you gain tranquility, or then the mind becomes quiet. And of course, he says to Bodhidharma, you know, my mind isn't at peace, put it at peace. Bodhidharma says, well, bring me your mind. He says, I can't find it. There, I've put it it's at rest. Can you help me connect these things and make sense of how this fits with the Lankavatara teachings?
Bring me your question. And I'll put it down. No, yeah, I mean, it's difficult only in the sense that it seems so obvious. I don't know how to point it out. I mean, a good reference here, in my view, bring me your mind. I can't find it. Look, there's a lot in between those two lines, right, that isn't written. So if I had to surmise, let me just paint a little fuller picture as I suppose it to be, okay? Because that's all the text we have. Wike is, first of all, before he even gets to ask this question, which was his driving force, how do I put my mind at ease? How do I put my mind at ease. Before he could even ask that question, he had to go through arduous and difficult process, dangerous to be able to even find where Bodhidharma was. And he was a general, right? He's a fierce fighting general, battle-hardened and scarred, okay? And he hears that there's an actual living human Buddha who's come here from India, and he's in our country. India is the motherland of all spiritual incredibleness, and he's traveled to our podunk place, and there's a living human Buddha here. Where is he? I have to find him. There's a general spirit for you. So he sets everything aside and goes on the arduous trek to try to find. Imagine hearing a rumor, there's a Jedi here. Where can I meet the master? It's something like that. So you don't even get that, but it's in there. So he finally manages to locate. You imagine him at the tavern asking for questions, right? And he overhears a story about, oh, this guy was at the emperor's place, and the emperor is donating all this money for temples and all the monasteries and everything, and asks, how much merit do I get? Because the sutras gush on and on about that. And can you believe this Indic teacher said none? And the emperor let him keep his head because he was so stunned, and the guy just left. Can you believe it? So from the tavern, a side quest became a major initiative. Where is this monk? Track him down. Hears rumors of the Shaolin, on and on. He finds in this mountain cave, there's this great master who really is. Not just a book, not just a scholarly, not one of us who just went there and learned how to translate something, but a living, breathing embodiment of the Buddha Dharma in human form that you can potentially interact with. Dude. So he finds his way there, and he makes his plea to be taken as a student. Bodhidharma completely ignores him. Bodhidharma sitting in the cave facing the wall. What was his marketing campaign? Although on the other side, I'm sure he was sending out flares, dharmically. But that aside, he just sat in Zazen. And so this successor arose, and I'm sure he could feel him coming. No, I'm not teaching you. So imagine that. You've risked your life to be able to be in the presence of this teacher who won't even acknowledge your presence, and you're like 10 feet away. The snow comes, you stand out there at the door waiting for entrance to the cave. And in desperation, the way the story goes is we cut off his own arm and presented it as a token of his sincerity and commitment. So that's the prelude. That's the wind-up before this pitch even occurs. So now you have the master's attention. Now, did he literally cut off his arm? I really don't know. But what I do know is there's a point in the story that's being made. That I know. That's not even controversial. It was at great cost, and this was serious. Here you have the mind of a real student, verifiably all in. And so at long last, the awakened master turns to the hopeful would-be disciple and says, okay, ask me. What would you ask? How would you respond? Well, in Huike's case, we say, he said, I cannot put my mind at rest, Master. Please help me how do I put my mind at rest? That's the patient presenting the illness. Get yourself in front of an awakened master and show them your mind. That's how it's always been. Same for Bodhidharma, by the way, no different. And at that state, when he was finally allowed, my name is Huike. My question is, he was, right? You feel the intensity of even getting to that point? You have to have some appreciation for that, or else Bodhidharma's response can't land. So I'm sure, gets very fierce. Your mind is not at ease. Bring me your mind. Now, I'm really quite sure that a lot happened between that line and the next one. Well, I can't find it. No. Imagine you've risked everything. You've done your best to show your mind, and you get this response. Bring me your mind, and I'll put it at ease for you. Now go. He turns again and faces the wall, like that's it. That's what you get. I feel old Huike went through some changes. He did some serious, like, bring my mind. How do I bring him? I have to bring the master my mind? What? How do I bring my mind? What? I mean, can you not feel this? So this, I don't know if it was hours or weeks or decades, but let's just say a sufficient amount of wrenching time went by. This is not idle, glib response. This is hard-won, heartfelt, heart in your hands response. Master, I cannot find my mind anywhere. What does that say? I can't find my mind. Mind is unborn, right? So when he realized unborn mind and presented, mind is unborn, Bodhidharma said, I see you. So it's at rest. So actually what happened was Bodhidharma's question provided pressure, It cut right in. And it cut right into Huike's broken heart. And it's exactly the medicine that Huike needed. Bodhidharma did not say, well, here, pull up to my whiteboard and let me make a diagram for you of the... It's not going to help. He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't do that. It gets very personal. It gets excruciatingly personal. Let's just be very clear about that. It gets very, very personal feeling. And in this realization of the unborn mind, the ungraspability can't be grasped. Buddha nature can't be grasped, let alone brought. Well, he realized that himself. Because of the pressure and the scalpel, the student then had direction to take what was just pain and suffering and channel it into meaningful effort. And then that meaningful effort produced a direct inner experience of noble wisdom. And that experience, when it happens, is the same for everybody. That Tathagata Garbha, clear light, emptiness, bliss, thusness, suchness, Buddha nature, all that stuff, it's the same. It's precisely the same. It's exactly the same. It's not similar. It's the same. And that's why it shows. When one human has deeply encountered the same thing, it's knowable by both. It's recognizable. Does it make sense? Like, why does the whole thing revolve around this word mind? Isn't it odd? No, it's not odd at all. Others? Kaishin? Yeah.
There was a section that was talking about various things not having habit energy. Error has no habit energy.
Yeah, the mistake, say it like this. You know how we always say, just receive the correction? You zag when you should zig, right? It's neutral. It's just an arising in the field of mind, so to say. It's an expression of Buddha nature like anything else. Then someone comes up and says, you know, you did that wrong. You need to do it this way. That's still just another expression. But oh, the drama. Oh, the stories. Oh my, how could they have said that in front of Sally who's watching? Oh no. Do you understand? So that name, form, discrimination, attachment, rejection, pleasure, pain, what does this mean about my identity and stuff? That now we're in the tumbler over and over and over and over and over. And I tell that story often about my being at Orioke and knocking over the soy sauce to show you. And the monk sitting next to me, who just recently passed away, by the way, his name was Yukon. So his funeral is going to be a week from Sunday. It was him. And he, you know, I was sitting next to him, and I'm terrified because he's a monk, and I'm not, and whatever that is, and knocked us over. I'm freaking out, and he just like pulls a little napkin out of his sleeve and cleans it up and keeps on going with the chant like another day in the life, you know. But for me, it was a major insult to me. I had embarrassed myself. He hates me now. The whole Sangha knows I'm a klutz. This is horrible. The drama went on and on. For more than, I think, 48 hours, as I recall it. I had the advantage then of being a mountain away from my teacher. And what that means is, by the time I went through all the pain and difficulty to actually get there, I was all in. That's why in some ways it's good to have a mountain between yourself and the teacher, meaning if you have to overcome an obstacle to get to the training, when you actually arrive, you're going to do the thing. It's not so much about physical distance, but it's about not taking it for granted. Sunk cost, right? You're here, let's do it. So I would like suspend grad school, which you can't do, and I did anyway, and I would go for a week, because that's how session was, right? So I'm in. And part of the deal is that if I left, they wouldn't allow me back again, ever. That's how they roll. You can leave, but you just can't come back then. It's pretty serious. So I stayed. And I worked through the chaos. And there was a practitioner here last session or 2 or 3, they jumble, but had a correction and felt horrible, was ready to leave. I know that feeling very well. So that habit energy, needing to look right and be the coordinated one and be respected and all that stuff, right, was cold water in the face. Oh my God. And then fortunately, because of sesshin and the fruits of sesshin, it enabled me to settle down, and I forgot about it altogether, pretty much. And then wouldn't you know, a few days later, I was sitting next to Yukon again. I did the same thing. I knocked the damn show you over again, as one does, as Kensei says, you know. As one does. But see, this time, I too just I knocked it over, and the chant is going, and I just took the napkin, and he helped with the other one, I helped with this one. There was a kind of a communion between us, and we just cleaned up the thing and kept going, and I barely even noticed it as a thing. So the error had no karmic habit energy in it. It's just soy sauce spilled, that's all. Cause, effect, clean it. So the effect of those two things wasn't even clear to me until later, when I realized the differential between the way they were perceived by me. I didn't decide, I will henceforth have a better aphorism about this, and I will see it differently next time. And it's like, no, it's not going to work. But because of the sesshin and the samadhi, my own equanimity was stronger force than the habit energy of trying to defend my ego. There was nobody there at the time to be offended. Wasn't there. It was just the chant and the passing of the food. That's all the whole cosmos was. There was no Jay sitting there. In my experience, my own subjective experience of that moment, I remember it vividly in my cells. It was just the chanting and the sound of the clink and the reaching and the fixing and the chanting and the passing and the bowing, just like the flow of everything. There's no me there for it to stick to. Does that make sense? There sure as hell was just a few days before. What's the difference? It's not me studying this book. It's not me tattooing the schematic on my back or on my arm so I can see it. It's practice, right? It's like getting your own body to settle down enough that you have a chance to unhook from that sense of self that is so relentlessly driving you. And you can't just volitionally say, well, I'll do better today, and just sort of put a little thing on your mirror and remind yourself. It won't last. You won't get outside of your apartment. You won't make it into your car before that's blown away. Why? Because mind. You understand? But what actually does work is sitting in a structured environment with other folks who are doing the same work. We were talking earlier about Sangha and the beauty of it, right? So the error itself has no karmic habit energy. The discriminations of, oh God, I'm a schmo, no one loves me, and they're right not to, on and on and on and on, that has habit energy. You see the difference? And also, Hoshi, if you would moderate or see if there's anybody online, I'm hard for me to know.
My name's Leanne. Based on what you just said, the general in his walking away to find his mind, is it that he sat with that question of trying to find his mind, that he stopped fixating on the things that had been haunting his mind or the things that had troubled him? So if he was like a general that had been through wars or combats, and those are the things that are haunting the mind,
Clearly.
by not fixating on those, not allowing them to control, because he went on this deeper search of the mind. Is that?
I wouldn't say it exactly that way.
Okay.
It's more like, I mean, that's very reasonable. You know, if this is stressing me out, if I focus over here, then this isn't going to stress me as much. That's not incorrect. However, that is not sufficient to catalyze awakening. So what has to happen is this thing, this troubled mind, you have to look right at it and go right through it. You have to see through the seeming solidity of that suffering self. So it's not like I'm going to look at something different, pleasurable or neutral, to kind of put my attention away from the troubling thing. I'm actually going to go right through the troubling thing. Who is it that's wounded? Or something like this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's, in that way, it's far more warrior-like. It's like you're going to directly turn about and confront. There's no evading. There's no distraction mechanism. There's no pretending it's not happening. It's the warrior spirit of the bodhisattva to turn and face not some other person over a rival god concept or resources or something stupid like that. It's just, we're actually going to confront the sources of our own ignorance. That's the real enemy, is that deluded mind, that font of hatred and greed. That's the one that we get warrior on. And so when Bodhidharma gets stern, like all the depictions of Bodhidharma are very severe, right? He's not just like a mean old guy, get off my lawn. He's severe at that deluded self, that ignorant aspect of us that doesn't see the true reality and causes us to suffer. That's actually where the fight is. So there are bodhisattvas that manifest very fiercely, very severe. And their severity and their fierceness and their fierce quality is directed at the source of our own ignorance, not at anyone else. It takes that, by the way. I mean, if you really do Zen training for real, and you're not, at least at some moments, needing to bring that kind of energy to bear, you're not doing it yet. There'll come times. I see you in the back. Is there anything online, or we're good?
Yes, I think Suju has a question.
Please.
Hi, my name is Suju. So there's a lot of talk about the non-clinging and stuff, and it seems to me like a lot of times people also tend to cling to non-clinging.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that briefly, because I know that there's like a fine line. It's like don't cling, also don't cling to not clinging, and
Yeah.
that's my question. I've spoken.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a word trap going on there, okay? I mean, you remember, conventionally, you have to, like, when the traffic light says red, you have to stop. There are consequences if you don't, right? So like the mundane functioning of ordinary everyday life, when you fully realize it, is the manifestation of everything. But that said, the mind left to its own will, without any critical self-reflection or awareness at all, have a stockpile of preferences to which it doesn't even feel like you cling. It feels like that's you. Well, that's me. It's not. But that's how it feels. It feels like I am the sum total of my preferences. The wounds I've suffered, the triumphs I have flags to show, that's who I am, right? And so when we're talking about non-clinging, what it's really talking about is not clinging to that stuff. Because clinging means obsessing, means being addicted to, right? It doesn't mean don't care about things. So, you know, I care very deeply. I care about my wife and my daughter and my parents and the society and my music and, you know, all these things. So it's not the case that because someone's completed their training, suddenly they're beyond it all. You know what I'm saying? But in the right measure, at the right time, if you can understand the distinction between what's wholesome and what's not wholesome, can you actually see what suffering is? Do you understand that by continually trying to stack the deck to more and more exciting experiences, you're actually building your own cage? Can you see that? Right? And when you can see that, you're free to do what you want if you're actually free. And to not kid yourself, very difficult. Again, this is where you need teachers and community and friends who can be impartial and be honest. But yes, if I were to cling to the idea of non-clinging, I could be a real jerk, right? Oh, I'm not attached, honey. Sorry, I don't have time for you. Well, I'm not attached to, you know, I said I'd be here to pronounce the Lankavatara Sutra, but I'm not attached to it. right? That's missing the mark. In the back, please.
My name is Tensen. I just wanted to thank you for sharing your experience with knocking over the soy sauce and dwelling on that, and then how the next time it occurred, you self-corrected and so forth. That really resonated with me, and I wrote down in my notes, don't cry over spilt soy sauce. Thank you.
Cry over spilt shoyu, yeah. I mean, I would like to just point out that to get very clear, it is not the case that the sense perception of the spilt shoyu went through my divided consciousness and I chose to respond to it differently. Rather, what happened was the experience of the shoyu spilling was in the belly of deep samadhi states. And in those states, it was simply another manifestation of the Buddha mind. So there was no me there perceiving it differently. Does that make sense? It's the subtle stuff, but if you can get a toehold in it, it'll save you. Hopefully, it'll save you a lot of time. Because if you stay in that vijnana, that divided consciousness group, trying to find it, it's never going to happen. All I can do is wait for you to be so exhausted of that you stop doing it. Right? So hopefully, we can get a little bit of a clue. Understand a little bit about how this works. And when you notice yourself, wait, I'm still trying to figure this out. That's not how it works. Just trust the process. Just do the practice. Voices we haven't heard recently. Yeah, Jukaya, it's fine. Go ahead. Oh, Enmei, please.
My name is Enmei. I wanted to ask a question because you kind of made a point of pointing out that it begins, the 5 dharmas, the 3 svabhavas and all that, and you took us through it and built that whole framework, which thank you, deep bows to that. But given that that's the first line, everything you read today was just examples and details of that. So if the audience, like the original, people sitting down, that this was their teaching, why did they need it? Because if they were already versed in it, what was the point?
Well, if they hadn't asked to just step into the fairy tale, then the Buddha wouldn't have responded, and then the sutra would not have happened. And then we wouldn't be here. Woo! So one answer is, Mahamati here, look, Mahamati can probably answer. In fact, in his preludes, he's laying it down, right? Oh, honored one, dost thou seest the world thus? And he's crushing it, right? But he's asking the question. And if you notice what he does, he'll come up and he'll do something with body, mouth, and mind, right? He moves the okesa from one side to the next. He bows. He purifies his intention, and he says the right words, right? So body, mind, and speech are purified. And then he asks the question for the benefit of all beings and all the assembly. So that's one perspective on it. Another perspective is that, on that same Mount Lankavatara is where all the Buddhas throughout all space and time have always proclaimed the same Dharma. There's only one Mount Lankavatara. You're on it right now. Okay, and it's always been this. Never been anything different. It looks different forms and shapes, but it's the same. Whether it's in the spirit realm or here or other physical planets or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's precisely the same. And just because you've heard it, and just because you know it, and just because you've understood it, doesn't mean your mind is actually at rest yet. So imagine if Huike there actually had found a sutra somewhere that had a Rinsen schematic, some bend in the time-space continuum, sent it back, and he could read it, and it was in a language and hopefully writing he could discern. And he knew that, and he could explain it to himself and anyone else. Doesn't matter. You know, the successor to this sutta is the Diamond Sutra, which is the same Prajnaparamita wisdom. It's easier. It's less Indic and philosophically. There's less philosophical jarring or sparring, jousting in it, right? It's a far more poetic, more condensed version. It has the same teaching, right? And Master Tozan was a scholar of the Diamond Sutra. It was his speciality. He knew every line, chapter, and verse of that Diamond Sutra. You could quote it at him, and he could explicate top to bottom the whole thing. Right? Now, this is well into documented history now. This is not fairy tale stuff. This is fact. There was a guy, his name was Tozan, and he was a scholar of that sutra, and he heard that the southern illiterates were talking about this actual awakening, and he thought that was so silly, he's going to go straighten them out. So here's a dude who actually is an expert on the text of the Diamond Sutra, and he confronts one of these beautiful women who's selling tea cakes by the side of the road to weary travelers, who's actually a fully awakened being, right? You know the story, perhaps. So he asks for a tea cake and then some tea, and the woman says, oh, monk, what is that in your backpack? And he says, oh, this is the Diamond Sutra. And she says, oh, you have affinity for the Diamond Sutra? So I'm a scholar of it. I'm a master of the Diamond Sutra. Why are you here, young monk? Well, I'm here to teach all you illiterate Southerners about the reality of the Dharma as espoused in the Diamond Sutra. She's like, all right, hold my beer. If I ask you a question about that Diamond Sutra, could you answer it? Of course. You may ask. I tell you what, if you can answer my question, I'll give you the tea and the tea cake on the house. But if you can't, you get out of my sight. So again, that's that fierce thing. See, remember Bodhidharma's face? It's the same face, guys. You know this thing about eyebrow to eyebrow? It's not like this, it's like this. It's the same face. It's the same eyebrows. It's not even just two people meeting. This is actually evil. Aku is like that, two ogres kind of button heads. It's when you look with the same face. You see with the same eyes as what this means, really. So anyway, she gave him that face. The one face. And when you're faced with the face, you have to face it. That's all I'll say. I've faced that face. So she says, all right, in that Diamond Sutra, doesn't it say that past mind cannot be grasped, future mind cannot be grasped, present mind cannot be grasped? He says, that's right. Chapter this, verse that. That's exactly what it says. What do you want to know about it? With which mind will you take this tea? He can't move. Can't answer. Literally, he has no way to respond. You know, you can feel the blood drain from his face and the stomach get a little queasy and the lightheaded, you know, the whole thing. He says, rice bag, be gone. So he's bested by this seeming woman selling tea cakes at the side of the road, kicked his Dharma ass. Ooh. So there's a case of a scholar who understood, but actually had not understood anything, because in his own experience, you see. So, I mean, happily, she took pity on him and said, look, I'm not going to bother with you, but there's someone who might put up with you down the way, go see. Roshi so-and-so, good luck. Get up. And with his bag in tow, he went and sought teachings. It might be like that. I see that we're right at 5. If there's any last burning? I see
Do
one.
we have time from the one more from the Zoom?
Sure. Is there one?
Yes.
My name is Claire. It has to do with attachments and such. When you're sitting and you have a glimpse of it, of horror or whatever, later when you sit the next time, how do you not be attached to wanting to get to that spot again instead of just letting your practice take you there naturally?
Claire, let me say what I think I heard, and you correct me. I think what you asked is, how is it if when I'm sitting in one period and I have some insight or a positive experience, do I then in the next sitting period not try to recreate that or hold on to it? Is that something in the direction you're asking?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, just don't. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, just don't. If you see that, just know what it is. It's discrimination in the mind that's forming habit attachments, right? And the karmic habit energy is kind of knocking at your door. Just don't answer. It'll get tired, and the energy around that will in fact dissipate if you don't play with it. Okay. And the thing is too, you got to realize that when you have an experience like that or some kind, what you're left with generally is the memory of it. And the memory of the thing is not the same thing as the experience itself. So if I remember a time and say Doan and I's relationship from decades ago in the Bronze Age, and I remember that fondly, and I insist on recreating that experience again just that way, we're doomed. It's just not going to happen like that. I can't meet her again for the first time. Well, kind of. Every day we do, right? But you know what I'm saying? So therefore, your Buddha nature is already guaranteed. You don't have to see anything or remove any obstacle. It's pure, just rest, trust yourself, but keep paying attention to what's right now. When we say suchness and thusness, it means right now. That's the lodestone. All right, so I'm feeling people are starting to leave. Maybe, is it hopefully somewhat quick? Okay.
Very quick question. It's about this handout that you've given us.
Oh, yeah,
I just want to
that.
ask a clarifying question. Where it has perfected nature of reality, and then that connects over to the twofold egolessness.
Yeah.
It cuts through the Vajnanas. Is there anything to where it intersects, or is it just walking by?
It's a mistake.
Okay, so
in fact, there's a YouTube video. There's not much on the Lankavatara Sutra, but there is a YouTube video of a Chinese temple that has a very fine female teacher, and she's kind of trying to explain the Lankavatara Sutra amongst many other topics. And what she does is a couple of differences. One of them being, in her little diagram, she has 6 mind, and it includes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 within it. And I felt that to not be sufficient, and so I wrote them all out. But then she could make that line. So, yeah, but it's no, there's no significance there, per se. I mean, or else I could have done like this. Might have been fun. Okay, everybody, I'm tired. And I'm happily tired. So I'm really grateful for all your attention. The sutra is very much grateful for your attention. I had intended to intone a couple of pages a day, and I find myself just incapable of doing that with the demands of my life as they actually arise, by the time I could potentially do it, I'm just done. So I'll see if I can continue that, but if I can't, you please do. Read a couple of pages a day, and allow it to just sing, okay? Don't get trapped in the Lankavatara hell by trying to parse all the things. If you're interested in parsing things, I really recommend Red Pine's version. His footnotes are fantastic, and they're also really humorous, and keeps it where it needs to be. The epitomized version is very good for just letting it wash over you, okay? Yeah. It is possible, and there might come some time in your training when I might ask you or direct you to take up various aspects on that mandala as specific objects of interrogation. So I don't want you to necessarily feel like you need to do that or ought to do that, but you should know that there are ways to investigate experientially everything that's there. All right, it really is not just a cool diagram. It's a topographical map of terrain to be explored. The koan system itself, it's all baked in. It gets addressed. If I find a particular weakness that needs addressing, I might bring some of these things up to you. And if that's the case, you'll know something of where they're coming from. All right, everybody, let's conclude with the Bodhisattva vows.
Please make 3 bows to the teacher.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Are we leaving each other for the moment?
Yes.
Do not being able to take down the belief.
Hazel will be there, yeah, she knows where. We probably will, but she. Yeah, I know. Me too. No, actually, that's when she was not in her bra, and you were like, oh, even worse. Yeah, that sounds about right too. But she had a shirt on. Yeah, that's right. That's what the situation was. You never have them when you want them.
Do you want me to pick it up? Or take those instead of you getting it?
I heard that. So, dress code. This is another hearing.
Oh, this isn't the other.
There's a lot of takeovers. Always that.
Oh, there's, oh, we're still looking for the other group.
Oh, you were thinking this was for the temple.
Yeah.
No, this is for you.
Oh, it's for you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And so I was getting a lot of questions.
Yeah, can you hear me at all, Hoshi? Oh, okay. Seems like they can hear me in the kitchen. You can hear me in the Zendo now. That's weird. Okay. All right, well, I can't hear anything in the Zendo. Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and end the Zoom.
Recording